Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring the Clan Battles reward ship, the Stalingrad. The matchmaking is pretty standard, a bunch of tier 10s, tier 9s, some tier 8s. It's a pretty okayish indication. I will probably be featuring the ship a bit more once I make up my mind about it. I played about 4 games in this ship right now, and these are pretty much my initial impressions of this ship. It's the reward for, I think, playing, was it Hurricane or Typhoon? You get a flag each season, and if you get 3 flags in 3 seasons, you get access to the Stalingrad. The first thing about this ship is that it's absolutely massive. It is a huge ship. Now, surprisingly, the Citadel on the ship, however, is only slightly above the waterline. It's a significantly smaller Citadel than both the Des Moines and the Moskva Citadels. I'll show you guys later at the end of the commentary. I'll show you guys the armor model and so forth. But the Citadel is quite small. It is still slightly above the waterline though, so if you do get broadside, you can quite easily get Citadeled as long as the aim is good on the opposing side. The HP pool reflects the size of the ship. 72k health, which is massive. It's significantly more than even the Moskva that has 65k health. It also has a very good torpedo build for a cruiser. 27% damage reduction if you take a torpedo on the belt. Now, 27 might not sound like much if we're talking battleships, but if we're talking cruisers, Des Moines, for example, only has a 7% torpedo build. Hindenburg has a 13% torpedo build. I think that's with the module, I'm not entirely certain. So having a 27% torpedo build for a cruiser is really quite good. Adding to this survivability is the armor of the ship, and that's kind of one of the big selling points of the Stalingrad. It's the only cruiser in the entire game with a 32mm bow and stern, and this is a huge advantage. The majority of the other tier 10 cruisers have 25mm nose armor, with the Des Moines being the exception with 27mm nose armor. 27mm nose armor means that it can bounce 380mm shells like Alsace, Bismarck and so forth. I mean, even the Moskva only has a 25mm nose, which means the battleships can overmatch it and pen it straight through the nose. So the reason the Stalingrad having this 32mm nose is such a massive deal is that it can bounce all battleship shells in the game except for Yamato AP shells. Every other AP shell in the game you can bounce as long as you're angled against them. So an angled Stalingrad is monstrously tanky against any incoming battleship fire. Combine it with the fact that it has a 50mm upper belt and deck armor, and it means that you can pretty much consistently bounce any battleships trying to shoot you. All this size and armor does come at a price though, a pretty steep price in fact. The concealment on this ship is awful, absolutely terrible. With a full stealth build, with full stealth captain, module, camo, everything, you can only get your concealment down to 14.4 kilometers. And this means that even, well, and even the plane detection is 10.9 kilometers, which is pretty much close to the max plane spotting range, which is 11 kilometers. So in case your plane, by the way, in case your plane concealment is more than 11 kilometers, it doesn't matter, because you can only get spotted from 11 kilometers anyway, because that's the plane spotting range. But still, 14.4 km concealment is awful, because even the Große Kurfürst has a concealment of 13.6 with a full stealth build. So Große Kurfürst can outspot you by 800 meters, and you're supposed to be a cruiser. So that's a pretty damn huge deal. Of course, this lack of concealment means that disengaging from battles is nigh impossible unless there's cover, like I'm using here, or if there's a friendly DD that can smoke you up. And if you get set on fire, one single fire will bump up your concealment to 16.4 kilometers, which is like a stock battleship concealment. So this ship obviously is a pretty damn prime target for HE spam. The speed is pretty decent, 35 knots, that's pretty good, faster than Hindenburg and stuff like that. But you're once again paying a very heavy price when it comes to maneuverability. The rudder shift with the 1 million rudder shift module is 12 seconds. Moskva, in comparison with the same module, has an 8.7 second rudder shift. So that already tells you something. That's almost a 50% increase. And then we have the turning circle. The Stalingrad has a turning circle of a staggering 1,130 meters. Over 1.1 kilometer turning circle. Even the Kurfürst has a tighter turning radius at 1050 meters. So the turning radius is absolute garbage. And this of course just compounds the playstyle of the ship. Once you commit to a battle, kind of like I've done here, you will have significant issues disengaging, because you have this combination of terrible concealment, massive size, horrible turn radius, and of course the fact that as long as you remain angled, you are incredibly tanky. Technically, at this point I could have accelerated and used the island in front of me to turn away and flee, but since I knew I was going to make a commentary on this ship, I figured this will make a pretty good example of just how insanely tanky this ship is against battleship fire. Because you can see I got a Kurfürst, an Alsace, and a Yamato firing at me, and I'll even have a Missouri shooting. You see the shells coming in from the left? That's a Missouri at B shooting at me. So we got 4 battleships shooting at me. So I'm just going to leave this here while I continue so you guys get an example. Now, the other big selling point on the ship besides the armor is of course these guns. 305mm guns, you have 9 of them. 3 turrets with 3 guns each. They have a default range of 20.4 kilometers, which is pretty damn good. And if you run the 3 million reload module, as I'm doing in this commentary, then you get a 16.3 second reload, which is pretty okay. The shell velocity is amazing. 950 meters per second, the Moskva shell velocity. I think it's the Moskva shell velocity. And the firing angles are very, very good. You are able to keep very angled while firing all your guns. But here of course we get to another drawback. Complete lack of HE. Absolutely no HE at all. Which means that while this firepower of the AP firepower allows the Stalingrad to punish pretty much any broadside, I have Citadel, Montanas, Republics, pretty much every single cruiser in the game, it means that angling against this ship will greatly reduce the damage the Stalingrad does. All cruisers, except the Royal Navy line, can pretty much go nose in towards the ship and bounce your damage. Sure, you can target their turrets and you can cripple them, but it's still a significant drawback. Another big drawback on this ship is obviously the consumable slots. You only have 3 consumables. Your repair, your heal are the obvious ones, and then you have to choose between radar and defensive AA. This ship doesn't even have access to hydro. No hydro at all, and when you're this big and this clumsy, that's a pretty damn big drawback. The radar is the standard Moskva radar. I'm not running the duration module right now because I couldn't be switching it around, but it's a pretty damn big deal. Now, if you give up radar and you slot defensive AA, the Stalingrad actually has the potential to be very strong against planes. While this trade-off might not be that big in randoms, for competitive it might be a pretty significant thing. As for clan battles, not having a defensive AA is no big deal, but for tournaments, defensive AA is pretty damn valuable in tournaments. So that's going to be a bit of a trade-off. Do you want to bring a radar cruiser, or do you want to bring a really good AA cruiser? Like, does the Stalingrad have a spot? That's going to be debatable. The AA values are very strong though. The majority of the AA is on the long-range high-caliber guns, 130mm high-caliber guns, which have a default range of 5.7 kilometers. If you slot AA and the AA range module, you can reach 8.2 kilometer range on that AA module. Combined with the DPM and potentially manual AA, for example, you can become an absolute monster at killing planes. So the potential exists, but you have to give up radar to get it. Is the ship overpowered? I mean, that is very debatable. That is quite debatable. It's incredibly situational. Angling against this ship practically negates all its damage. I mean, you saw that Alsace, as long as he remained angled against me, I had issues doing any damage at all. I tried to target his superstructure, I did break one of his turrets, temporarily, but ultimately you really struggle to do anything against angled ships. But in return, pretty much everyone else struggles to do damage against you as long as you remain angled. As long as you maintain angle like this, the only one who's really actually doing any significant damage to me is that Yamato, and that's because he's the only battleship in the game that can actually overmatch my nose and pen that 32mm nose. Everyone else, when they shoot me, are pretty much bouncing my shells or breaking my turrets. That's of course the downsides of being a cruiser and sitting nose in. Ultimately, if they hit your turrets, they will most likely break them. Conqueror burns it. I'm pretty sure Hindenburg practically hard counters this ship. Hindenburg is the one ship I would say that pretty much counters this ship entirely. The ability that, like, with the improved German HE pen, it can easily pen that 50mm armor, and in competitive, I'm pretty sure that's going to be one of the big downsides with this ship, is that Hindenburgs will be able to farm it. Just like the Hindenburg kind of counters the Moskva, it counters this ship even harder. So that's obviously going to be a big downside. On the other hand, if you find a good location to park the ship in, with some island cover nearby and maybe a DD scouting somewhere in front of you, it's pretty much an additional pocket battleship for the team, and you can probably provide some really nasty crossfires, especially as battleships can't really do too much about this thing, even if it's spotted and they try to shoot it. Unless the enemy brings a Yamato or their Montana switches to HE, they're gonna struggle to deal significant damage. So that's a pretty damn big deal. At this point, I'm finally about to go down. That was the Yamato, not the Kurfürst. I bounced multiple shells from the Kurfürst, but it was the Yamato that finally killed me with that overmatch mechanic. We ended up winning this game. Only 140k damage, but I didn't really select this commentary for the damage. I selected it more because it gives you an idea of the tankiness that this ship has. If we look at the team score, we can see that I did top the scoreboard, even though my damage wasn't very impressive. And the reason why I, of course, topped the scoreboard, we see when we get to the detailed report. Potential damage, 4,421,600. That's 4.4 million potential damage in a cruiser. If it wasn't for the Yamato, I could easily have gone way past 5 million. In fact, they would still be trying to kill me if it wasn't for the Yamato. So the potential to outlast and just tank the enemy battleships, the survivability of this ship is absolutely monstrous. And it's going to be an interesting situation because if anything, this ship will really separate the good and the bad players, because if you get broadside in the ship, it's just as squishy as any other cruiser. I mean, it has a lower Citadel, but it's still gonna get blown up. If you angle, it's gonna be tanky as hell. So, once again, what are my opinions? Is it OP or not? Bit too early for me to tell. Let me show you guys the Aaa values, the armor model, and the current build that I'm actually using on this ship. Right, let me start off by actually showing the armor on the ship, since a lot of people will no doubt be requesting that. As you can see, 32mm bow, the top of the bow, and the strip here is 50mm, which means if you're shooting the ship in a Yamato, you actually want to make sure you aim at the upper parts, because this part will obviously auto-bounce your shells. 50mm deck armor, 50mm upper belt, 180mm Citadel belt, or well, honestly just belt in general, and 32mm stern, and once again another strip of 50 and a smaller strip of 170 here. So obviously against AP, battleship AP, as you saw in my commentary, if you angle the ship, battleships are going to heavily struggle. Now you can target the turrets, and well, you can break them as well, and you can target the superstructure, but ultimately against battleship AP, this ship is very strong. The Citadel, let's show the Citadel. The Citadel is very small, quite low, pretty much only slightly above the waterline, and protected pretty decently as well. However, if you compare it to Moskva Citadel, you can see just how massive the Moskva Citadel is, and if you compare it to, where's my Des Moines? The Des Moines Citadel, you can also see how much larger the Des Moines Citadel is. So a very small Citadel. I still think the major problem the ship is going to suffer with is that HE spam. This combination of lack of concealment, horrible turning circle, and just a large size means that, well, Hindenburg is the hard counter to the Stalingrad. There is absolutely no doubt about that, but it is still very strong. And honestly, I think it's a bit early for me to tell if I consider it an OP or not, but it's certainly not a weak ship, not by any means. I mean, this is the Aaa values, by the way. This is without AFT or the AA range. I'm using the improved gun accuracy right now, but if you add AFT and the AA range, you can boost this to 8.2 kilometers. And I mean, if you add manual AA on top and you slot defensive AA, obviously you guys can understand just how monstrously strong this aura will become when you focus fire enemy planes with manual AA. It's so the possibility of building the Stalingrad like an AA cruiser is certainly there. It certainly has the firepower to be able to pull that off. Captain wise, I'm currently using my Moskva captain because, well, it synergizes really well with the Stalingrad. You have vigilance, which, considering you don't have any hydro, I really kind of want it. I don't think on my Moskva I don't think I use vigilance, so it's slightly modified. On my Moskva I use basics of survivability because it's a clan war build, but on the Stalingrad, vigilance is more important as you don't have access to any hydro and you're so damn massive. Concealment, because otherwise you have worse concealment than a stock battleship, so that's kind of necessary. Fire prevention, because once again, one of your big downsides, your hard counter is basically HA spam, so fire prevention is a pretty straightforward build in that sense. Expert Marksman is practically mandatory on the ship. Your turret traverse is 40 seconds at default, but then if you run the 3 million reload module, your turret traverse actually becomes 46 seconds, which is, I think, worse than Montana's stock 45% or 45 seconds. Wait, let me see, where's my Montana at? Yeah, 45 seconds is the stock Montana, I actually remember that. So if you run the reload mod, you actually have a worse turret traverse than the Montana. So slotting Expert Marksman is pretty damn important. In fact, with that elite commander coming up that has an improved Expert Marksman, it might be very valuable on this ship. Priority target, of course, because we are cruisers, and everything else should be pretty straightforward. Module wise, I'm running the reload mod because the default range of 20.4 is more than enough for randoms. For competitive gameplay, it's a possibility that you might want to slot the range mod instead. It certainly is a possibility. It's very common that cruisers in competitive slot range instead. Concealment, because, well, it's already 14.4. I feel like if you don't run any concealment on the ship, you're never going to get undetected in any situation, which will make life extremely difficult since you can't really move on the map at all. Faster rudder shift because it's so garbage by default. Better gun accuracy. Now here's certainly the option for the AA guns since your AA is so powerful, but considering your guns are kind of your bread and butter with this thing, especially if you're sitting at long ranges, I do like the improved dispersion. Turret survival, which is very much needed. As you saw, I already lost a turret, and just additional tankiness. Consumable wise, here you can slot between defensive AA or radar. The other two are pretty straightforward. That was my Stalingrad first impressions. I will be playing the ship a bunch more and making up my mind about it, but my initial impressions is that it's very strong, but it's quite situational, and it does have multiple ways of being countered, the simplest being just angle against it. The lack of any sort of AP means that it's very hard for it to actually deal any damage if the player knows to angle against it. On the other hand, it's very hard to deal damage to the Stalingrad as well, unless you happen to fit certain criteria. Ultimately, an interesting ship, and I will come back to you when I have a better opinion of how I feel about this ship. I'll talk to you guys later. I hope you guys enjoyed the commentary.